Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to a Thursday collection connection where we're playing that game that's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, Plastic Eric, over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. Every Monday, he shows an album. Every Thursday, I show an album. And the thread that glues it together, if I can mix metaphors, is that each album has to relate in some way to the album previously shown. We also talk a little bit about the connecting album, if we have impressions, and so pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Let's move ahead. In Eric's last video, he showed Black Sabbath's Sabotage album. I'm more familiar, as he was, I think he said in his video, maybe it was just in conversation with me, that he is more familiar, or was more familiar with Ozzy solo. We were sort of coming of age after Ozzy had left Black Sabbath, and so his first run of solo albums was kind of more hitting where we were able to pay attention to it when we were kind of old enough. So I don't know a ton, actually, of Black Sabbath, but it surprised me a little bit. It wasn't a bad listen, and I have nothing particular against Black Sabbath. It really doesn't hit me right where I live, so it's not anything that I would buy. But the vocals sometimes sounded very Ozzy, and other times sounded more sung. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that his approach to vocals is doing multiple takes and kind of marrying them together to kind of give it a thick, honeyed vocal. That sounds like the approach because it always sounds like several voices when he's singing, and maybe on a couple tracks that wasn't done and it just sounded more sung and less Ozzy. It was fine. I mean, it was interesting to hear. Didn't have a ton of impressions, I gotta be honest with you. A new Legend of Zelda video game came out very recently, Tears of the Kingdom, and most of my spare thought synapses have been focused on playing that game and not playing this game. So cramming together as much info with as little research as I can get away with for this video. And so to connect, I looked into some of the recording information, and it was recorded at Morgan Studios, named after one of its founders, Barry Morgan, in London. Opened in 1968, I think, or at least I think that's when they started producing their first albums, and stayed open till kind of 1980, really 1984, but it was sold off in part in 1980, and they didn't really produce a whole lot of note in the span before the rest of it closed down, or was sold off. So Morgan Studios was functional from about 1968 to 1984, but really more like 1968 to 1980-ish. And in that time, a ton of acts came through, bands like Supertramp and Pink Floyd and Free and The Faces, Rod Stewart, Jerry Rafferty, a bunch of stuff, kind of 70s stalwarts that I don't have in my collection. But predictably, after 1977, things started to change a little bit, and there were a couple of albums recorded at Morgan Studios that I do have. And one of them is the first Peter Gabriel solo album. I could have picked that one, but I didn't. And additionally, the one I did go with is the first album by The Cure, Three Imaginary Boys. This incidentally has a connection to my last album that I showed, The White Rabbit's Milk Famous, in that it has a big pink background as a cover image. Just a little extra bonus point there for me. But this first Cure album is interesting. It's not one that I have owned for a super long time. My version here is a deluxe edition, but this is a rare case where the deluxe edition is the first copy of it that I've owned. And some of the reasons for that I'll go into in a second. This first album is interesting in that they were a trio when they started, and one of the three members, Michael Dempsey, not 100% sure that's Michael, but I'm pretty sure that it's Dempsey, only appeared on the one album. Robert Smith is the only band member he is The Cure, basically. Lawrence Tolhurst, who started on drums here, before moving later to keyboards and more drum programming a little later on, a few years down the road, before leaving in the early 90s, maybe late 80s. But as a trio, just starting out, just sort of figuring out their sound. It does sound a little different than even the subsequent batch of albums, the 17 Seconds and Faith and Pornography, and those albums that were much sort of more dark and goth. These had a lightness to them. These songs, even though they were a little different, they're still sort of moody tracks, including 10:15 Saturday Night, which is one of my wife's favorites from them. Although I may be confusing that with A Night Like This from Head on the Door. Nonetheless, the album in the English tradition did not contain the singles that had been released around that time, which were Killing an Arab and Boys Don't Cry and Jumping Someone Else's Train. And so it wasn't one that really stood out to me as a must-have ever, really. And there was additional confusion as they kind of got the Beatles treatment in the U.S. in that their first U.S. album was called Boys Don't Cry, used some artwork that was, I guess, on the inner sleeve somewhere on the original version of Three Imaginary Boys, but a different cover, much different track list. They basically jettisoned 5 of the 7 songs from side 2 and plugged in those singles plus a B-side and reordered the whole thing, kind of front-loaded it with those singles. So much of side 1 shifted to side 2, and much of side 2 was just gone. Only really left, I think, the title track, Three Imaginary Boys, and Fire in Cairo, I think, which was the affiliated artwork that became the cover for Boys Don't Cry, was a depiction of Fire in Cairo. Surprisingly good. It kind of fits in well with where they ended up going later in the 80s, more pop and less doom and gloom in the Head on the Door and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me kind of phase. So if you like those albums, there's some stuff to like here. I will give you a warning if you're not familiar with it. I believe it's the end of Subway Song. Just kind of cuts suddenly to just a pants-crapping scream that, if you don't see it coming, will lead to a bowel accident. So you want to avoid that. Be ready for it. But everything beyond that, there's a cover, interestingly. And so one of the interesting things is that I think maybe the American version of Boys Don't Cry would have been closer to something Robert Smith was happy with, because he was not happy with some of the songs that were included on this record, including a cover of Jimi Hendrix's Foxy Lady, which he said that they would do during sound checks, and had Dempsey singing the lead vocals, marking maybe the only time. I'm not sure if they switch vocals elsewhere on this album, because his own vocals sound a little early Robert Smith, a little harder to instantly recognize as him, but that may be the only occasion on which the vocals were handled by somebody other than Robert Smith. I enjoyed Grinding Halt for a deep cut maybe to look out for. Object, I think, was pretty good, but I haven't listened to it a ton, I have to confess. And with the whole second, so this is why I was able to buy it ultimately, because those singles that were not on the original version of Three Imaginary Boys, but were on Boys Don't Cry, are included here as bonus tracks, with the exception of Killing an Arab, which we went into when I connected. Eric played the singles collection, Standing on a Beach, and I noted as my connection there that they had sort of disowned the song Killing an Arab because of a certain fan base who sort of willfully misinterpreted it and used it sort of as an anthem for violence. And Robert Smith doesn't really want to have anything to do with it at this point, so that doesn't appear on this 2004 reissue. But the other songs do, and I have that on Standing on a Beach, so I guess I'm still covered. But Morgan Studios in London is the connection between Black Sabbath's Sabotage and The Cure's debut, Three Imaginary Boys. Supposedly, they sort of snuck in while the Jam were there recording All Mod Cons. Another album I could have kind of picked. I don't really have All Mod Cons, but I have the complete Jam box set, which includes the entirety of All Mod Cons, along with the entirety of all the rest of the records, but um, it doesn't stand alone. But in any case, supposedly they would sneak in after the Jam were done for the day with the same producer and sort of recorded it in the dead of night, more or less live to tape, and kind of punched it out in about a week. Robert Smith, I think as a learning curve result of this album, he didn't like and didn't approve the album cover, and he didn't like and didn't approve the track selection. So he made sure going forward that he had control over both of those things. But other than that, it's kind of a curiosity. Is it worth owning? I don't know. It's interesting. It's definitely got some early classic singles on it if you buy the American version or this reissue. So I will throw The Cure's debut from 1979, Three Imaginary Boys, over to Eric, and you can look for his response on the Plastic Soundwave Cult on Monday. That's all I have, so I thank you for watching, and bye-bye.